Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily short story. Now, before I start today's story, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this short story and any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers and at your local bookstore and local library if you requested, and you can order paperback copies from Amazon. Now, here's today's short story. I hope you enjoyed just as much as I did writing it.
Jubilee Terror Celebrations. The 2nd of June 2022. London, England. Private Eye Bettie English had never really been too much of a royalist, but as a British person she had always kept an eye on the royal family, what they were up to, and listened to private eyes when they spoke about secrets they had uncovered in their own investigations. Bettie walked along a very long London street, with little terrace houses lining the street with not a single parked car on the road, and everything had been freshly polished and cleaned for this very special occasion. With Bettie's boyfriend Detective Graham Adams being called in to help protect, control the crowd, and provide security for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Bettie was more than interested in wandering around London, and then hoping to go up to the Mall, see tons of amazing people from throughout the Commonwealth, and hopefully watch the trooping of the colours as the Platinum Jubilee weekend officially started. Bettie couldn't deny how excited she was that the Queen had been reigning for 70 years, and she had done a great job. Given the Queen had no political power, or not much power whatsoever, she was more of a cultural icon in this day and year, but Bettie didn't have a problem with it. And that was probably why people loved, respected and treasured her so much. Because she had no power, and she was part of the country's somewhat questionable history in the days of the Empire, people were always interested in how she had kept up with the ever-changing world. Bettie had actually met the Queen once. Bettie listened to the distant talking, shouting, and other excited noises as thousands upon thousands of people gathered in London, just hoping to see the Queen, the trooping of the colours and any members of the royal family. It had been a few years ago when Bettie, some other private eyes, and the current president of the British Private Eye Federation, David Osborne, had travelled to Buckingham Palace to get an audience with the Queen. And even though Bettie had expected and known, she was a very kind, polite and down-to-earth person, she was still rather shocked by how much attention, respect and love that the Queen gave all of them. Bettie would never forget how the Queen actually wanted to hear how Bettie found being a woman in this modern era, and doing a so-called man's job. Bettie loved the beaming hot sun on her face, and her pregnant body, as she wandered further down the long London street towards the sound of the excited tourists. There was such a buzz of excitement, joy and celebration that captured all of London, and Bettie just loved it. It really was amazing how much London seemed to be alive today, and united in the celebration of the Queen. Bettie loved the wonderful smell of bacon, eggs and bitter coffee that her pregnant body hated her to have, coming from a local cafe. And even though she started to feel ever so slightly sick at the smell of bacon, her body seriously didn't like animal products since she got pregnant, it was still a wonderful smell to start off today. With Graham busy helping to police the crowds for the next few days, Bettie wasn't sure what she was going to do. Everyone had the next 4 days off, so everyone could join in the celebrations. So Bettie was more than looking forward to the wonderful street party that was going to happen on her road on Sunday. It would be simply wonderful seeing all her family and neighbours and friends coming together and celebrating together. But Bettie was really just looking forward to the vegan food, the company and the non-alcoholic drinks. It might have been a time for celebrations, but she was definitely not putting her unborn twins at risk. The sound of 2 deep voices a lot closer than the excited crowds hundreds of meters away made Bettie focus on the long street. She had been the only person here a moment ago. Then at the very end of the street were 2 very tall stone buildings, that they're probably offices. There were a group of 5 men dressed in all black and they were quietly talking almost themselves. The men were such a strange contrast to Betty, in her stunning flowery summer dress that hid her baby bump very well, her wonderfully comfortable high heels, and her little black purse that only contained her phone and a credit card. Considering the entire city was alive with excitement, affection, and jubilation about this weekend, Betty couldn't help but feel like this was something important. Sure, she knew that not everyone liked the Queen and the royal family. But even those people tended to at least acknowledge this was something to be happy about, and they wouldn't dress in all black on a boiling hot day. In the rare event that these men were going to cause trouble, Betty tried to figure out what the point of their meeting was at the end of the street would be. Betty noticed that the buildings were definitely tall enough to overlook the rows upon rows of houses and other London apartments in front of it. And if these men went to the very top of the buildings, then they would have great line of sight. If these people weren't dressed in all black, then Betty couldn't have cared about their great line of sight to the mall, the palace, and other important roads involved in the trooping of the colours. And in actual fact, with the Queen's mobility issues in recent months, still amazing for a 96-year-old, this was the only day the palace had absolutely confirmed the Queen would be in London. Betty wanted to gasp, and she felt her stomach tighten at the realization that someone wanted to try and kill the Queen. Then this was definitely the day to do it. Perhaps the only day. Then the 5 men dressed in all black looked around, didn't see Betty, and they all went inside the taller one of the 2 buildings. Granted, one of the buildings was only a meter or 2 taller than the other, but Betty knew that was still important to snipers, or whatever these people were. The smart thing to do might have been to phone Graham, her handful of contacts from MI5 from a previous case, or just call the police. But they wouldn't believe her. Betty knew from conversations with other private eyes that there had been a dramatic increase in terrorist, both abroad and domestic, chat in the weeks coming up to the Jubilee celebrations. And with the war going on in Ukraine, Betty knew that Russia was also plotting to destroy the Jubilee. So MI5 and the police would definitely have their hands full without her suspicions, and because Graham's protection assignment was classified, Betty only knew he was in London, she couldn't contact him. Betty was alone in this. Just in case this was a terrorist attack and MI5 did want to listen to her, she sent a quick message to Agent Daniels, an agent she had met on a previous case, and just hoped that he would read the message. But if that didn't happen, Betty wasn't going to let some idiots kill the Queen, spoil her weekend, and become remembered in the history books. No terrorists deserved that honor. Betty quickened her pace. She was going to go into that very tall building and find out what the hell was going on. One of the benefits of being a private eye was definitely that Betty made contacts with all sorts of knowledge, including a very serious security fault in most electronic locks installed by the Mrs. Locks company. Thankfully, the very tall building Betty had wanted to get access into was locked as tight as Fort Knox, but it had a Mrs. Locks security system installed. So Betty simply typed in 123 and the door opened for her. Betty went into a rather small black reception area with nothing more than a black desk, 2 black chairs, and a lift door. Betty hated the musty smell that radiated from the chairs, and it was rather clear that no one had loved this reception area for ages. But Betty couldn't help but feel like the reception area was nothing more than a front for something. The entire space just felt off for some reason. Considering the building was so tall and massive from the outside, Betty was surprised that it felt so small on the inside. And even above the lift doors it showed the lift moving up the floors, and apparently it had stopped on the 6th floor. But when Betty placed her hand on the cold lift doors, she could feel that the lift was still moving upwards. So why did the building or owners only want people to believe there were 6 floors? Betty noticed there were 4 security cameras in each corner of the reception area, so she went round behind the desk to see a very small computer screen built into the desk. Betty flicked through the security cameras. She couldn't even see herself standing in the reception area, and apparently the lift was empty. Someone had looped the feeds. The door clicked. Betty just smiled to herself and she instantly knew that she was now locked in the building with 5 potential terrorists, so she definitely had a choice to make. She couldn't break the computer screen and just hope that the building had professionally monitored security that wasn't being hacked, or she could try to unhack or unloop the security cameras herself. Not that she actually knew how to do that in the slightest. And it wasn't like she could call her wonderful nephew Sean and his boyfriend Harry, the computer experts of the family, because they were revising for some exams next week. Betty felt her twins kick inside her, and she just knew that she had to press on and try and find these potential terrorists herself. Betty turned her attention back to the computer screen, and swiped away from the security cameras, and she brought up a floor plan of the building. As she expected, there were apparently only 6 tiny floors in the entire building, but at least the floor plans were stupid enough to indicate the wall behind the reception area was false. In fact, there was even something about it being privately monitored and not on the main system, so if Betty opened the wall, it would certainly alert someone. Betty turned and tapped the large black wall, and it was certainly hollow. Betty couldn't believe how excited she was getting, so she looked back at the desk, saw a pair of scissors, and she stabbed them into the wall. A slight vibrating sound filled the air, then fell silent. Betty quickly cut through the wall that was made with nothing more than very good-looking cardboard, and she was very surprised to see a small, dusty staircase in front of her. This would definitely be the perfect way to sneak up the floors and past the potential terrorists. The terrorists would probably be able to hear or feel the lift moving up after them, but the stairs would be perfectly silent. Betty was very glad that she could finally take off these damn high heels that might be comfortable, but they were most certainly not practical for private eye work. She gently kicked them off and placed them firmly at the bottom of the staircase, so in case someone came in, they would instantly know something was wrong. Betty loved the feeling of excitement grow inside her. She raced up the staircase. Betty couldn't believe how outrageously hot it was in the little pitch-black staircase. She was so hot sweat was refusing to pour off her anymore. She had been walking or stumbling more like up the stairs for 20 minutes, until her hands felt a little wall in front of her. The stairs felt awfully musty and dusty and just awful. Betty didn't want to be in here any longer than she had to be. "Snipers are activated," a man with a deep voice said. Betty was surprised that the man sounded so close, even though he was on the other side of the wall. Betty used her hands to search the wall in front of her, and she was delighted to find some kind of switch. She flicked it. The entire wall collapsed. Betty gasped as all the 5 men dressed in black just stared at her. Betty had been expecting there to be a little secret hole in the wall, so she could peek through them. Clearly that wasn't what that switch was designed for. Betty frowned as 5 guns were fixed on her. But Betty didn't care. She was much more focused on the very tall, muscular man in the middle, the only man not covering his face, holding 2 military-issue guns at her head. "Military. Former soldiers," Betty said, looking each of the men up and down. Betty pointed to the man at the other end of the little penthouse room she was in, with thick glass windows all around them and no furniture. This had to be the top floor. "I'm guessing snipers?" Betty asked, as she watched the man expertly cut the glass so he could have a clear shot from the window. Betty gestured if she could get closer, and the man holding 2 guns nodded. Betty just gave the former soldiers a quick nod of respect, when she noticed that the sniper was staring at the balcony at Buckingham Palace, where the Queen would be standing in a matter of. The distant sound of people screaming in excitement, and the royal bands playing loudly, and the clopping of horses made Betty want to be sick. The trooping of the colors was happening now. The Queen would be out at the balcony at any moment. "Why this building?" Betty asked. "And why am I not dead?" The man with 2 guns just gestured to Betty's baby bump. That was a massive relief. "My other question?" Betty asked. "Eagle, when the traitor is on the balcony, kill her." "That is my command," the man said. "Confirmed," the sniper said. Then Betty was surprised to see the other 3 men lowered their guns, walked behind Betty, and picked up a sniper rifle each, With all the wall collapsing and the guns focused on Betty, she must have forgotten to properly scan her surroundings. Then the other 3 men cut expertly done holes out of the glass and aimed at the balcony too. They were killing tons of the royal family. "The building," Betty said firmly. The man with the 2 guns that was clearly the leader smiled and shook his head. "You know what your queen's grandfather did to our people," he said. Betty almost missed it, but she was a little surprised to hear faint hints of a Russian accent, but it was so faint that the men clearly hadn't been in Russia for decades. In fact, the men sounded so British, and acted exactly like other members of the British Army Betty had met before. "Coming onto the balcony now," one of the snipers said. Betty noticed a red dot on the leader's ears, and Betty didn't know how she knew, but she just knew that she had to buy a little more time for something. "Don't shoot yet. Don't you want the attack to be famous? Wait a few more minutes, so the entire family is on the balcony, all the TV cameras and people are watching. Come on guys, this is basic," Betty shouted. "Hold fire for 60 seconds, the leader said. Betty didn't dare let her smile show. Betty walked straight up to the leader. "The building, and what did the Queen's grandfather do to Russia?" The leader huffed. "Your King George V could have saved Russia and the royal family. You could have saved Nicholas II, he could have allowed him to come to England. But he didn't. The entire family died, even the children." Betty wasn't exactly sure what to say. She had studied the First World War, and the politics and history of the 3 grandchildren of Queen Victoria, and how they waged war against each other, but what could killing the Queen do after over a century? Again, she only needed to buy time. What could this killing achieve? Then Betty instantly realized that the Queen was never going to be the intended victim. There would be the Queen's elderly adult children, her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren on that balcony. And what better way to make the granddaughter of King George V suffer than watching her own children die? Just like Nicholas II of Russia would have to do all before he died himself. "This wouldn't change anything for Russia. This is only," Betty said. The leader held up 2 guns to Betty. "This isn't about Russia. Russia can die. This is about the British royal family learning what it means to suffer," he said. There was no changing his mind. Betty took a few steps back and waved her hands. 5 bullets fired. 5 corpses smashed onto the ground. Betty's twins kicked in excitement in her stomach. She was seriously starting to wonder how much of a handful these 2 were going to be in a few months. "Bet!" Graham shouted. Betty felt her entire body go weak when she heard her beautiful sexy Graham was coming for her. Granted, he was a bit late, but better late than never. Graham dressed in his blue denim shorts, white shirt and black sunglasses, and looked stunned as he walked up the stairs and looked at the 5 corpses in front of her. "I always knew you could look after yourself," Graham said, kissing Betty. Betty just nodded. Then she smiled. She couldn't actually think of a better way to start off the Jubilee celebrations than by saving the Queen and the rest of the royal family. As Betty and Graham were about to walk back down the stairs, Betty didn't want to be in a lift on such a hot day, not that the stairs weren't much cooler. She just looked at the corpses a final time, knowing that the bodies would never be discovered. "Long live the Queen," Betty muttered as her and Graham went back down the stairs. Then Betty quickly told Graham the so-called reasoning for the attack. Makes sense in a strange extremist way. What better way to embarrass the royal family than on this historical occasion? Betty nodded in the pitch darkness as she carefully went down the stairs. "How did you find me?" Betty asked. Graham laughed. "Agent Daniels called. And I was already in the area dealing with some protesters, but Daniels wanted me to ask you, do you know about the purpose of this building?" Betty smiled a little. She knew there was something wrong with this building in the first place, and it was even stranger than the police hadn't secured it. They had secured all the buildings that gave snipers a perfect shot of the Queen. So why had they missed this one? "I cannot say I do," Why? Graham stopped on the pitch-black staircase. I think this was always meant to be a trap, a lure if you will for terrorists, and I think this is some kind of government research facilities, Graham said. As crazy as it sounded, Betty completely agreed with him. This building was rather perfect in a way because it was tall enough for people to keep a lookout for anyone about to invade the building, giving the government time to move their operations, and Betty was sure the glass wasn't easy to cut into from the outside, and it would most certainly explain why the glass was so thick on the top floor. It was so thick because Betty wanted to bet it was bulletproof. It had to be, considering how dangerous it was for the snipers to poke their rifles out of the windows. Police officers, agents, and everyone would be looking out for that sort of behavior. A very risky move for those terrorists. Betty and Graham kept walking down the stairs, and when Betty went into the reception area, she didn't even bother to pick up her high heels again. She simply went straight out the door, and back into the delightfully warm London air. The air wasn't too hot, and it was filled with the sounds of excited people and hints of sausages, eggs and bacon, and it was filled with such a buzz that Betty really felt alive. And she couldn't be happier than she had helped to protect this amazing historical occasion. Graham wrapped his amazingly strong, sexy arms round her, and he started to kiss her neck. I am a plainclothes officer today. Want to help me? Graham asked. Betty just smiled and pure excitement shot through her. She couldn't think of a better way to spend the day. She got to protect people, be with the man she loved, and she got to celebrate with the country she loved. And that was a perfect beginning to a perfect long weekend to Betty.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.